superintendent. If you had asked me to do this a year ago, I would have said the same thing I'm saying to you now, because the data should drive that. And so I hope that you get that sense. And I made it very clear to Michelle and Becky, wherever the numbers take us is where it's going to take us. And without further ado, I'm going to go briefly. Obviously, Paul's correct. I think board members, you all know how to read, so I'm not going to read things to you, but I do want to emphasize some points in the backup material that was given to you. And I hope you have that in front of you. Okay, the first part is, I started looking at the factors related to salary. You know, and I've talked to Becky, and that's kind of where, this is kind of where we came to the point that I'll do some research. Is I was talking to Becky, what are your issues? What are the things you're dealing with? And she mentioned at a board meeting, she had presented to you some data on superintendents, and she said, kind of left the impression that it wasn't really clear as to where, if you had enough data, and she wanted to give you more information. So that kind of drove me into doing this work. So after I began to think about it, as a superintendent, I did searches for school boards. I was a county soup, and so I started recognizing what are the factors that you as a board, politically and pragmatically, need to deal with. So that's where these 6 factors came from. So factor 1 is the complexity of the job. I've been around the block a long time. Goes back to 1985 when I first became a superintendent. And so I have seen the evolution of the county office. In fact, I was on the county superintendent when AB 1200 came on. And they're talking about politics. There were lots of politics behind the scenes in AB 1200, particularly with county suits, and I was one at the time, because we recognized that if we didn't, as a county, did not give substantive things for county boards to do and county office of education, that trend at the time was to regionalize, that in essence the counties would disappear. So AB 1200 was a tool to get counties engaged, and at the same time it brought to you a lot of politics and the complexity of that. You go, what do you mean by politics? When I was in Natomas and Denair, that board was under tremendous political pressure from the county. But when you put pressure on a school board as a county superintendent, because you have to sign off on their AB 1200s, and you get some reactions from superintendents that frankly irritate them, and that makes it a little more difficult the next time the county superintendent runs for election. So the politics of the position when it comes to AB 1200, you can really irritate a whole bunch of people by not certifying their AB 1200 document. And so that's a very different set of realities, particularly if you consider running for a superintendency. Now, layer on that now, LCFF and the LCAP. Now you got, not only have you historically been focused on the fiscal issues, now you're taking the fiscal issues and the programmatic issues and, in a sense, combining them, and you become, again, this clout on these school districts. And so the complexities of the job and the political dynamics of the job are much greater, in my opinion, than they were 30-some years ago. The other aspect, we talked about it this morning, you're not San Diego, thank God, but $1 million for a county board election, in the old days, you didn't need to put money into an election. 30 years ago, you just put your name out and you walked and shook a couple hands and you either were or were not elected. But I don't know what Michelle spent, but I do know that in counties, county offices, the superintendents have to raise funds, which is another political dynamic, or take money out of their own pockets to run for the office. So I'm trying to say to you that the level of responsibility, factor 1, has increased significantly. And at the same time, I've tried to have you understand that if you want quality people, and I think we should have that, I think the kids demand quality leaders in the role of the county superintendent, then you need to provide an environment that'll motivate them to run for the office. And part of that environment is the fiscal dynamics. At the end of my kind of spiel, I'll be glad to answer any questions you have. Or if you want to interrupt me, don't hesitate. Factor 2. When you look at data and you start comparing data, you need to have a pool that's big enough in data that you can kick out the highs and kick out the lows. And so I really always emphasize when I work with school boards, shoot for the median. Why? Because if you can pay the top teacher salaries, the top administrator salaries, and you'll have nothing left over to maintain your buildings, you'll have nothing left over for technology. If you don't pay at least the median, you basically are running the county or the district on the backs of an employee, in my opinion. So you need to be fair, but you don't need to be extravagant or fiscally kind of taking advantage of people. So I had to, when we were talking, we said, okay, how big a pool could we draw? So we drew the pool from group 7, group 6, and group 5, and you can see on the second page of my little letter there, and the attachment 1.
And Walt, I just kind of wanted to let you know, in case you weren't aware, we've got someone from the public report, so.
Oh, good.
Just so you know.
I was wondering.
Yeah, I just didn't want you to be caught off guard and.
Thank you very much. That's very helpful.
No
But
problem.
bottom line is, I will say what I have to say. But I appreciate that. So that pool was group 7, which is not you. Group 6, which you have about 12,000, I think, ADA in your county.
Yes, we have about 12,500 and.
Right.
12,265.
Okay,
Yeah,
then
right.
group 5, I put
No.
those together.
17, I'm sorry.
Put those together because I felt it was a large enough data pool and relatively similar in a number of areas. So, for whatever's sake, that's why I did that. So now we looked at, in factor 2, the relative cost of living. You tend to be a rural school district, but having come up through Napa, I was at a thing at a jazz concert last night in Napa. Having come through Napa and all the wineries and everything that's coming up here, you are not quite like Reading, in my opinion, from a cost of living point of view.
Or even different than Lake County next door.
Right, so that, very much so. And so on attachment 1, this is data that thankfully Ryan provided to me, and it shows your relative cost of living relationship to the other counties in that group of those 3 groups. And I believe there are a total of 7 groups, but we took the bottom 3. So Mendocino has 1.22.8 cost of living index. That makes sense? Okay, and so that is relatively much more expensive to live in Mendocino County, in my opinion. I would love to see if you differ with that opinion, but based on what Ryan provided to me, your cost of living has a factor and should be reflected in, yes, sir?
I saw one problem with this, and that is, has a long time on it, and if you look at the cost of living over where I live, and the cost of living here, there's an enormous difference.
Yeah.
Right.
You know, the multi-million-dollar homes are over there on the ocean.
Right.
Where
And of course, our superintendent is not living over there on the ocean.
No, but this is based on the county seat, so this is based on,
That's where the cost came from. on this.
yes, so if you look in the second to last column, it says county seat, and that's the basis of how we determine.
So it's not an average for the whole
No,
county cost
it-
of living,
It's
it's
the
based on
county seat.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, thank you so much. So that's factor 2. Good question, good point, good clarification. Factor 3, comparability to local districts. So we took again, I believe that the norm, in my experience, and I think you're gonna have a hard time proving otherwise, in counties, that the county superintendent is not the highest paid superintendent. So I do not believe you need to get into mindset that you should pay the highest salary if you are of that mindset. Some of you may be. But generally what happens is you have a salary that is below what I call the bigs. Stanislaus County, the bigs, with Modesto, Ceres Unified, which I happen to be in, and Turlock. And the 3 bigs look at the county super and say, I'm gonna take a salary cut to do that? I don't wanna do that, okay? And the same thing applied in Kings County, when I was down there. You had Hanford, you had Lemoore, and then you had the Littles. You have two bigs. I believe, one man's opinion, you got one big. That's Ukiah. Okay, and so fundamentally, the Ukiah superintendency, that's why I like the medium. Kick it out, kick the lows out, and go to the medium, generally, if you do that comparison. If I was advising on regular school districts. So with that understanding involved, we looked at attachment 2, and we asked what were the daily rates of each of those folks. And you go, why did you do daily rate? The salaries are distorted. Very candidly, the older I got in the superintendency, the less days I worked, because I got paid the same amount of money and worked less days, and I'm no dummy. I've been around, so that's kind of the game the superintendent sometimes plays. I just wanted the number of work days, and then we divided it in by the annual salary, and then you can see that in attachment 2, the daily rate at that point. And Ukiah's $818.69 a day, Willits is $704, Arena is $644. The current salary is at $608.93. And then you can see the others. So that's the ranking of the county in relationship to the bigs, and I don't know how big Willits or Arena are. I think they're in the 2,000 to 3,000.
Willits is closer to, a little over 1,700.
Yeah, around 2,000.
But Arena's not. Arena's much smaller. They're like 700 total, I think.
Super, okay. So, anyway, I'm trying to give you data, okay, and a point of view. Factor 4. Factor 4, comparability to Mendocino teaching staff. The age-old question, it has to be, how is the relationship between your administrative staff and your teaching staff? And what I believe is a school board should be focused in on is competitive salaries with each of your different units. In Ceres Unified, in the middle of the Depression, we worked really hard from 2007, really 2001 to about 2007, 8, of getting comparable. So when we did the salary cuts during the Depression, because the board said they weren't going to lay off people in the middle of the Depression or cut the student day, in the middle of that, we equally applied an 8.5% salary reduction across the board to everybody, short ones, and survived the Depression. I call it Depression. The point of that is that if you are comparable and if you are competitive, you can philosophically look anybody in the eye and say, you know, every job's different. The custodian gets paid a competitive salary, superintendent gets paid a competitive salary. Most people don't understand what a CEO does unless you've been in that position. One of the things that somebody asked me, they asked me, how do you know when a CEO is making too much money? I said, usually the guide that we use is when the person who's asked the question, if they make more money than that person. It's really one of those things that it's all relative, and you don't, unless you walk in those shoes, you don't know what it is. And so to take all that away, you look at the data, and you look at what the market will bring, and the competitive aspect of it. The same thing with the teacher. But you need to have a ratio between your administrators and your teachers that's fair. So with that in mind, I looked at, okay, what are the teaching ratios? What is the ratio between the daily rate of a superintendent and the daily rate of a teacher? And again, why did you do daily rate? Because the days are different. You look at the number of days that teachers teach 188 days. They have a 188-day work year. I guarantee you they don't teach 188 days. There's probably 8. My guts tell me there's 8 staff development days there. So, and you can see the norms are generally about 184, 185. We took it by the daily rate. So for example, in Ukiah, you had 4, you don't have any of this data.
It's okay.
No, I have another packet. Here. Okay.
No, that's fine.
The daily rate of Ukiah, ratio between the superintendent, difference, ratio. And then between Willits, it's 35.74. between arenas. When you get down, the ratio between the county soup and the teachers is 23.68. Okay? Okay.
Is it attachment three you're looking at?
Attachment 3, yes, okay?
You're looking at two. Oh, I thought we were on three. No, we're on three.
No, you're on three. You also put it in two.
Yeah, I use that same data to look at the superintendent's daily rate.
Three is highlighting.
And the yellow's the highlight, and so you're looking at that, so we sorted by the daily rate sorted by the daily rate on the ratio. And the point being is the ratio between the MCOE and the teachers are, in essence, the second in that sequence. And in essence, the teachers are ratio-wise, in my opinion, paid very competitively. You look at the daily rate of the teachers, 475 is Ukiah, 464 is the MCOE teacher's daily rate, the top teacher's salary. And so the teachers are paid I didn't sort by that, I should have sorted by the teacher's daily rate column also. You would see that the MCOE teachers are the second highest paid teachers in the county. And your superintendent is not the second highest paid. That's do you see that point?
You know, one thing, you went just by your, rate between the teacher's salaries and the superintendent's salaries, it would be more like 37%. Instead of, breaking down, if you just went yearly.
Right.
Yeah.
The critical factor, yeah, that's one way of doing it annually. What I try to do, because the data is so disjointed, you work 100 days and get paid X, or you work 200 days and get paid X. Very, 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 very different. So, I understand that point, but I think the point is we try to get it down into daily rate. Yes, John? Right.
Teachers to get the top of the salary schedule, they very often have, I know in Mendocino, it was 3.5 years of more calling to work.
70 units or something.
105 years. I taught 26 years, I never made it there. I had, but I did have a year. And the reality is, at this stage of the game, there are very few teachers who are at the top. And I know in Mendocino, but there are very few there. And then also, I know that it takes an administrative credential to become a superintendent. In this particular case, Michelle is just beginning the job as a superintendent.
Right, and there's ways to deal with that if you want to.
Right, but, the point I'm making is your percentages would change considerably if you looked at average teacher salary, which is probably not what most of our teachers are.
But the reason I didn't choose superintendent, I would disagree that the norm for salary schedules is 30 years. The norm, what's the top, how many years?
It varies between 20 and 30.
For teachers?
For teachers, you're looking at about 25 years.
So that, you have 25 years of steps. So superintendents usually have at least 10 to 15 years, at least. And I just for curiosity, again, this doesn't have to do with Michelle. How many years have you been in teaching? Okay. So I would say that factors in. I would consider that as a factor. So I don't think that distorts it by taking the top, in my opinion. But that's a different way, another way of looking at it. All of this is a combination of quantitative data, and liars never figures only lie. But data, and hopefully clean enough data where you can draw some conclusions conclusions and at the same time some qualitative data, some points of view. That's what I'm trying to give you, so you can come to a conclusion. That's the intent.
And I think we'd find that even though percentages would be different, I think you're still gonna see the ranking very much the same, almost.
But again, the significance of seasonality is an important factor. And then one other factor is jobs very hard, okay? They're dealing with kids who've been expelled and in juvenile hall, and I've had experience with all types of those students, and my feeling is they deserve more money because of who they're running.
And I will not dispute that, and I don't, Michelle and I have had conversations about that, and I believe, based on my conversation with Michelle, you and she are in sync. There is a factor, but what I wanted to attribute here is, if someone looks at this and says, the superintendent's should be so much, a ratio between the superintendent and the teacher should exist. This present ratio, the present salary, clearly denotes, in my opinion, that the teachers are paid at a much higher relative rate than the superintendent, not the other way around. Had it been the other way around, I would say to you, if you give the superintendents more money, which is going to be my recommendation in that position, you're going to create a negotiation problem, and with the teachers. You don't want to create a salary with your administrator that's so high that the teachers come back and say, okay, you're the second highest, we want to be the second highest. In this case, your teachers are the second highest. So I just want to make sure that people are at peace with that when you start dealing with the teachers' point.
We are, because we've been there. Paul Fishman was here, I looked at that salary schedules, and I described it as anemic. And we had major problems with our teachers.
And
It
to
was
just-
really Warren the levy, and.
Just to interject one thing, so we did finish up negotiations last week for next year, and I'm gonna be talking about that at the end of my budget presentation. But that will for 1920, the teachers are going to have an increase to their salary schedule, and we revamped their schedule so that longevity is no longer going to, be a part of it. Instead, it's career increments. So if they came in and they had 12 years of experience, but they were only with the agency 1 year, they'd be on step 12, then 13, then 14, and then be at a standstill until they had 14 years with the agency. So now it's gonna be, for each year, they get the step increase as it's career increments. So we'll talk more about it, but that factors into all of this because they're gonna be making, even a higher salary at that point, so.
I wanted to make sure my recommendation that you as a board reflected on that.
Right.
Because I'm not saying any boards in this county would ever do that, but I've seen boards just jack the superintendent's salary up, hold them, or, ridiculous, and then just pay teachers little or nothing. And that's not my philosophy, never has been, and that's not, I believe, Michelle's philosophy. And so I wanted, repeating myself, I wanted to make sure I gave you that kind of information. So I'm gonna go on to factor 5, if I can. Factor 5?
A superintendent or principal has to work additional days in order to be able to get the same retirement credit that a teacher would receive for the 187 or 185, depending on what their contract year states. And so that's why the daily rate is generally used instead of the annual salary. Because if you go annually, it's really apples to oranges and not comparable, in my opinion.
Okay, attachment, factor 5, comparability to administrative staff of the county. One of the questions I asked Becky and Ryan was, if I was an administrator here, what's the highest potential salary I can make? What's the highest potential? And so with that in mind, Normally, the relative variance of the CO to the next level down administrator ranges from 15 to 30%. That's the norm, and I checked with a couple of my sources, because that's a gut level thing. There's no data out there, but a couple of gentlemen by the name of Doug Prancer, Ryland and Associates, I work with school services, I got to receive the data from the school services. And my experience has been the ratio between your superintendent and your next level down is somewhere between 15 and 30%. What do you mean by that? If I make 100,000, the next, the deputy superintendent or assistant superintendent will make 85,000, 15% variance. That's the norm. You know, there are some districts as much as 30. And to me, that disparity is too much. When I was in Series Unified, I ended up having my deputy at 85% of what I made, my assistant soup at 75% of what I made, and we all had contracts, and we all did well together, or we did poorly together. And so that was the way that we ended up doing that. But in your case, when I reviewed the data from your situation, your potential daily rate for your top administrative potential daily rate was $656.92. $656.92 is factor 5, as compared to your present superintendent's daily rate of $608.93. So you got the reverse reality. Most districts, your CEO's the highest paid position. In your district, you got it kind of upside down. Yes, ma'am.
No.
What salary are you using?
Internally, this is superintendent salary.
That's not an actual salary.
No, it's a potential.
No, that's the potential, that's the highest amount that the associate superintendent level can make.
And frankly, that's another discussion I've had with Becky particularly, is, and we've been playing is that your salary schedules with your administrators are kind of, you got a couple different ones, and they're not sequential. I know Paul's retiring. Who's the highest paid? Paul. That's a public record thing. So
It is.
And so I don't know where they're going to end up negotiating his salary, but I would really encourage Michelle and Becky to get this thing turned around correctly.
Well,
Okay.
and we're not hiring back at an associate superintendent, so that will help with this.
And then Becky, where do you grade?
So I'm assistant soup, so I am the third, well, I guess I'm not the third highest. I think we have a director too that might be higher than myself because of number of years here.
Yeah.
So I'm I think, fourth highest.
But the potential of your position salary.
Oh, yes.
Because you have several steps yet that you have to go.
Yeah, I still have a number of steps to go, so,
But
I
your
did
relative,
bring it.
based on
I
what
can
I saw,
tell.
your relative, the CBO's salary schedule relative to the other administrators is lower than the other administrators. Is that an accurate statement?
Correct.
And so, that in and of itself is a whole different ballgame that I think Michelle and Becky need to really analyze. But it really, whatever you determine, very candidly, if I'm your superintendent, whatever salary you determine is going to be the salary that I'm going to work off. If you go way up, you're going to distort both the negotiation and you're going to distort when it comes to the other administrative staff. If you go real low, you got this reality. And that's, in my opinion, I don't know philosophically how I can defend that personally, the reverse. Doesn't make sense.
I'm bringing it up right now so you'll know what the assistant top amount is.
Yes, well, that does it, Don.
I have doubts. You know, when I first came to the county, I sort of felt like at that stage, the county was the only one that had it right. And that was because Vicky Carr, as the associate superintendent, was making more than the superintendent. And as, you know, I negotiated contracts with 4 different superintendents. I had the best of superintendents and the worst of superintendents. But in all of that process, and it's happened to me as a board member, certainly not other district boards and everything, I'm always impressed with the fact that it's the business manager that really understand school finance and the nuts and bolts of what's going on in the school and at the county level. And, you know, over and over and over, we have one right here. These are intelligent, focused, disciplined, good employees. They're smart as can be, and they really know what they're doing, okay? I quit going to the superintendent's room. I wanted information as a negotiator. I went to the business manager. You know, the superintendent, they're off at the Rotary luncheon, or they're at the Little River Inn at a conference, and those are important things to do. But when it comes to the nuts and the bolts of running the district, it's the business manager. At the county level, I think it's even more important. I mean, this bill you talked about, where the county office has to review every budget of the school district.
So can I add?
Let me jump in.
That's
And
the
I'll let you
business
go.
manager who does that
Okay.
important job.
Okay. The business manager doesn't have to run for election the next year. And that's really a major factor. Two, when we want to pay someone who's a leader of leaders, who has the guts enough to stand up and take the opportunity, take the job of saying to a school district, publicly if necessary, you got a problem. You also have an educational problem. The educational leadership I know business as well as most folks, but I'm driven by my what's best for kids. This CBO, and my experiences with her, is what's best for kids. One of the issues we're dealing with, is you're gonna get to, we've talked about casually. I asked the question, what's your reserves? Okay. Now, fiscally speaking, lots of CBOs and lots of superintendents make their careers out of having how much is in the bank. And the problem with that is this year's money needs to go to this year's kids. So if you don't have that voice of strong leadership saying, how are we going to take this money? Yes, prudent reserves, and you need to have huge reserves as a county because you have things that jump up and down. I'm not saying you shouldn't have reserves, but you need to have an educational leader that'll say to the board and to the CBO, I understand we all can sleep well when we have huge reserves, because you can sleep a whole lot better at night when I got reserves. But on the other hand, not at the cost of what's best for kids. Programmatically, if we so the tail of the dog in a school district, in my opinion, the county office, is the business department. The head of the dog is the educational department. And so, with that in mind, you want to have a county superintendent who does the Rotary thing. I mean, like it or not, that's part of the job. But you need to have one who has enough knowledge of business to be that quality factor. So I'm not disagreeing, then you can do your thing.
Well, what I wanted to say is that a superintendent, whether it's at a district or a county office, they really have to understand all of the program piece. But if they're truly a good, solid superintendent, they have to also understand the business and fiscal piece of it. And so I would have to argue that a CBO, yes, is an important role, very critical role for a district, for a county office. But the most important role is that overall leader that has both the program side and the fiscal side when they do. Not all superintendents are like that, but when they do, I mean, they really are the one that can piece it all together. And so I'm not trying to discount that the CBO role isn't critical. I just wouldn't say that it's the most important.
Yeah, and Don, if to make sure you understand, if I was the county superintendent, my second highest, after you pay me or whatever you pay me, my highest paid support person will be my CBO and my ed services. They should be on par, because symbolically it sends a message that they're both important. And whatever it takes to get them is what I need to do to get them.
Well, your best argument is the superintendent gets the final and ultimate responsibility.
Absolutely.
But again, my experience with the good and the bad was, who was in that superintendent's office had very little impact on what I did in my classroom, okay? What I wanted was my paycheck.
Yeah.
Okay? That's how I viewed the ultimate responsibility of the superintendent's office.
But I would say to you, I think you're right, and I'm not trying to sell you fake point, but I would say, that's advocate. The teacher is a superintendent who is driven instructionally. Because you're taking programs back right now, which is very candidly, that's strange for me. I'm all over the state, and they're pushing programs back out to the school.
Right.
And you're taking back, the schools want them back, because they can do it more cost effectively. So that's another issue we're talking about with the cabinet, is how to deal with that. But you're bringing them back, and you want your superintendent going, where's the balance? If you're a regular classroom teacher, you want Charles Manson Juniors in programs that are county programs. I'm not trying to be mean, but there are some really tough, hard kids. And you want them in class sizes that are responsible class sizes. That's a programmatic decision. And she's gotta be able to articulate to the SUPs, we have 6 kids per teacher in this classroom, and we have an 8 per teacher. And programmatically, she can say, that doesn't make sense cost effective wise. She's gotta be able to explain it, not she, but the superintendent needs to explain it. So I'm saying to you, I totally agree with you. The only thing I differ with you, I think your best advocate for teachers, your superintendent. So let me get going, because I think that note is like lunch is served, isn't it?
It is, I was wondering if we might
Yeah, we think
eat
we'll
while
take-
you're presenting.
Yeah, pretty
Break
good.
to eat here, is that okay with you?
I can do whatever you like me to do. I'm here until the end of your meeting, unless you go to midnight tonight. So, Press, you gonna hang in there for a couple of minutes? Okay.
I'd rather go ahead.